This story contains elements that may be triggering for some. Discretion is advised. This piece of writing is the intellectual property of Shyla Brooks and is copyright protected under U.S. and international copyright laws. Reproduction and distribution of this written work without written permission by the named author is prohibited. Copyright 2023, Brooks, all rights reserved. This short story is dedicated to Brianna. If Only by Shyla Brooks. The small, dilapidated log cabin sat at the end of the unused, overgrown path. The log cabin itself, overgrown with vegetation. Nature desperately attempting to reclaim the building as its own. Mushrooms, vines, and moss growing out of the cabin's roof and sides. To the left of the tiny cabin, a makeshift fence surrounded an overgrown garden. The garden held fruits and vegetables that had been left to grow, and grow they did. The patch of pumpkins took over more than half of the garden with their ginormous size. It was not just the pumpkins. The apples from the gnarled apple tree produced fruit to the size of the largest of grapefruits. What looked like overgrown grass, on further inspection, revealed itself to be all kinds of medicinal herbs. The local townspeople avoided this overgrown path, the area, and this tiny log cabin. Not because of the tiny, overgrown log cabin, but because of what lived inside. Mavis, on a particularly dark, ominous, rainy day, walked home from her day of work in the neighboring village. Mavis rushed home, trying to avoid the next downpour of rain threatening to begin at any moment. She took the downward path's turn too fast, and she slid the rest of the way down the slope because of the puddles and mud from the most recent rainfall. "Ow, ow!" Mavis said out loud as she gingerly stood up, her dress now stained and wet from the puddle of mud she slid through. "Oh, just great," trying and failing to brush off mud. "Mother is going to give me a lashing when I get home." Mavis tried to wipe off as much of the thick mud as she could from her dress and stockings, but it was a lost cause. Mavis collected her basket of leftover flowers. Her boss, at the end of the day, would let Mavis bring home any unsold flowers from the flower shop where Mavis worked. She only ever took the daisies. They were her favorite. She found and then grabbed her empty sack lunch and continued walking, hoping if another downpour happened, it would wash some of the mud off her. Mavis, lost in her thoughts and worrying about what awaited her when she arrived home, she did not realize she took the wrong fork in the path. Thoughts of the lashing and punishment she would receive from her mother flooded her mind, making her oblivious to the fact she walked the wrong way. She could not have known her fate had been decided, and later she would long for her mother's lashing. Mavis, completely lost in her thoughts, did not notice this was not her normal way home. She kept playing different conversations and scenarios in her head she would soon have with her mother. No matter how she played it out or what she told her mother, she knew she would be punished for ruining her dress and stockings. Mavis, now a young lady, had bright hazel eyes and long, straight brown hair. Mavis knew she was always a disappointment to her family, which they reminded her of their disappointment any chance they got. Her family consisted of her parents and her two older brothers. The other members of her family always told her she daydreamed too much and no good man would ever want to marry her if she did not act more her age and matured. Mavis had no interest in finding a husband, getting married, or having children. She wanted more from life than what was expected of her. The young men in her town never paid her any attention anyways, because they all liked the beautiful, prim, and proper Gladys. Gladys was everything Mavis was not. Perfect, slender shape the boys loved, perfect silky hair that never frizzed, perfect skin without blemishes, and a beautiful face. None of the young men wanted anything to do with Mavis, which did not bother her too much because she did not like men. After the years of torture from her two older brothers, teasing and playing their harmless jokes on Mavis and how the other boys would laugh at her expense. She despised boys. Mavis felt determined to forge her own path and to find her own happiness, and that is why she took a simple job in the next village over. Mavis felt free not being in the town she grew up in, and she even made a new friend when she started working for the flower shop. He came by most days on his lunch break from work to chat with Mavis. They had the most interesting conversations. Sam was different than other boys and men. He was softer and kinder. She wished on multiple occasions they were siblings instead of her mean and cruel brothers. Mavis had not seen Sam for several days, and she decided when she went to work the next day she would ask around to see if he was all right. With many thoughts flowing through Mavis' head, she only became aware of where she was on the path when she turned a bend and saw a dilapidated, overgrown log cabin. In the fading light of the dying sun, Mavis thought she saw mushrooms growing out of the house. The fence surrounding the cabin looked like a slight breeze would push it over. She realized she had taken the wrong path and ended up here. She sighed. She silently cursed herself for not paying attention to where she was going. Mavis meant to turn and start making her way back down the path, but she stood there for a moment, apprehension and anxiety growing in the pit of her stomach, knowing she was in big trouble when she finally made it home. A soft, soothing, surprised voice called out, "Oh, hello there," stopping Mavis' wild thoughts. "I beg your pardon, I took the wrong turn at the fork. I'll be going now," Mavis said, taking a step to leave. She was not looking forward to making the long trek back in the dark. She silently cursed herself again for her lack of awareness. Another example for her family to use against her. That is quite a walk back, and it is almost dark. Mavis instinctively moved closer to the voice to see the person. She walked past the opening in the fence and saw a doll-shaped figure hanging on the fence. She stopped next to it, not giving it another glance. Suddenly there was a flash of lightning and a thunderous boom above, and the wind picked up, whipping the trees. It began to sprinkle. "I know you probably want to get home, but why don't you come in? You cannot travel in these woods at night with it raining. I would be beside myself with worry knowing I let a young maiden walk home in these conditions." Mavis saw a human-shaped shadow standing before her now. The woman had been crouched down harvesting from her overgrown garden. She held an apron in front of her with her vegetables. "You look like you could use some warming up. Come inside." "Thank you," Mavis said, taking a step forward with her head down. She felt shame and resigned herself for being in more trouble when she got home the next day. She stopped suddenly, her head whipping around towards the doll hanging on the leaning fence post. She could have sworn it moved. As she stared, it remained motionless, her eyes playing tricks on her. Mavis followed the shadowy figure into the tiny cabin. The warmth of the glowing fire burning inside the fireplace felt welcoming after the damp chill outside. As Mavis closed the door, she cast a quick glance at the downpour starting. She breathed out, thankful she had listened to the woman to stay. She would have been walking home, and knowing her brain, she would not have made it home safely. The firelight made the small cabin glow. The small room had a worn rocking chair with an old blanket draped over it. There was an oversized armchair with patch repairs. In the center of the room on the floor laid a worn-out, frayed, handmade rug of different colors. Mavis saw a small kitchen in the back. She could see various jars of herbs and spices lining the shelves, jars of liquid mixed in with various herbs. A rope stretched across the kitchen with various plants hanging from it, all in different stages of being dried. Herbs and various flowers hung from the banister of the narrow stairway leading to the room above. She understood where the apothecary aroma came from. Despite all these oddities, the most peculiar oddity were the crocheted dolls and creatures strewn about the tiny cabin. Mavis stood next to an armchair, saw it too had one of the odd crocheted dolls resting on it. She leaned down and picked up the doll and examined it. It was a curious-looking patchwork doll made from different colors in the shape of a person. Mavis gave it a gentle squeeze, feeling its softness, and set it back down. When Mavis met the woman outside in the dying light, she could not see what the woman looked like and had assumed it was an old woman. Now, in the light of the fire, she could see the old woman was in fact a beautiful middle-aged woman. Mavis was captivated by the woman's beautiful curvy figure and the ringlets of dark curls cascading down her back. Mavis watched as the woman took the fresh vegetables out of her pockets on her apron and set them on the counter. "Please come in, dear," the woman said in a soothing voice. "Make yourself at home." The woman grabbed a knife and began to chop the vegetables in an experienced and unhurried manner. "Thank you, ma'am," Mavis said, taking her muddy boots off at the door and walking over to the chair by the fire. She held her hands over the fire to warm them. "I'm Mavis," she introduced herself. "Hello, Mavis," the woman said, continuing to chop the vegetables, not looking up. "I'm Brianna." "It's nice to meet you, Brianna," Mavis said, taking a seat on the cushioned chair. "Thank you for letting me stay for the night. I don't know what happened, but I ended up taking the wrong turn on my way home from work," Mavis explained. "Oh?" Brianna stopped chopping for a moment to look at Mavis, her green eyes twinkling. "A young lady, and you are working?" She went back to chopping, but first had to brush a ringlet from her eyes with the back of her hand. "That is odd for this time." Mavis was accustomed to people judging her for being weird and different, for not wanting to settle down, marry, and start having children. She had always wanted more from life than what was expected of her. She wanted to find her own way instead of what her parents or society expected of her. "My parents think so too. It took a lot of convincing for them to let me work," she found herself explaining. No one really listened to her in her hometown. In fact, when she met Sam and they started to talk, he had been the first and only one to listen to her. "I'm from Hagtown, but I work in Warlock Village." She found herself opening up now to the beautiful and strange woman. "It's the only time I feel like I get any peace from my family and from my town, where I can just be me. I even have a friend in Warlock Village. He is really nice." Everything's spilling out like a waterfall now. "He treats me nicer than any boys have, but I don't think he likes girls, in that way. Which is fine. I don't really like boys that much anyways. All the boys from Hagtown haven't treated me too nicely. They make fun of me and tell me how I will never be like Gladys. They tell me all the time how ugly I am." Brianna had finished chopping the vegetables and now stood listening to Mavis spill her life story like spilling tea. She had one hip pushed out with her fist resting on it while she leaned on the small counter, her green eyes becoming angry. "I'm so sorry," Mavis said suddenly, realizing she had been rambling and knowing Brianna did not want to hear about her life. "You don't want to hear about all of my troubles. I'm boring you." Mavis looked down at her hands, embarrassed. Brianna remained silent. She picked up her cutting board and walked to the cauldron hanging over the fire and dumped the vegetables in the steaming black pot. She walked to where Mavis sat and looked down at her with compassion. "Don't do that. Don't hide your thoughts and feelings from me." Brianna placed her hand on Mavis' head gently. "I see how people have hurt you. I understand because I've been hurt too. This is why I live away from others." She leaned down close to Mavis, their faces inches apart. Mavis felt captivated by Brianna's eyes. "You are more than enough, and you deserve to make your own life. It is your life and no one else's. You hear me, Mavis?" Mavis nodded, tears streaking down her blushing cheeks. "Good," Brianna said, standing. She gave Mavis a gentle pat on the head. "Now, go upstairs. You will find a closet with some clean clothes that should fit you. They may be a little big, but you need to get out of those dirty clothes and get cleaned up." Brianna went back into the kitchen. "I'm going to finish making us dinner," she said happily. She felt excited to have such lively company for the night. Mavis, at the mention of the dirty, mud-stained clothes, jumped up. "I'm sorry, she stammered. "I'll clean up the mess when I come back after I change," she said, feeling the old familiar feelings swell in her chest. She always disappointed people, especially her mother, by her not paying attention. Brianna waved her off. Don't fret so much, little one. Now go. Mavis nodded and walked up the stairs. After Mavis cleaned the dried mud off herself and changed into a baggy purple dress she found in the closet, she walked downstairs, carrying her dirty clothes in her arms, but feeling refreshed. Brianna had changed as well and now wore a long, black form-fitting dress, showing off her voluptuous curves. Ah, there you are, Brianna said, setting her crocheting down and beaming at Mavis. Dinner will be ready shortly. You can set your dirty clothes over there, she pointed to the corner. Go ahead and have a seat. We can chat while we wait for dinner. She stirred the delicious smelling food simmering in the cauldron. Mavis felt better after cleaning herself up, and she realized how hungry she felt. Right on cue, her stomach growled. She picked up a round, pink, crocheted stuffed creature and sat down in its place on the rocking chair and stared into the fire. Mavis, lost in her own thoughts and worry, absent-mindedly petted the soft, plump doll in her lap. She felt calmer holding it, and soon she drifted off to sleep. Mavis, dear, Brianna lightly patted Mavis' knee to wake her up. Dinner is ready. Would you like to eat? Mavis' stomach again responded with a loud, hollow growl. Brianna laughed, walking into the tiny kitchen. You stay. I'll get you a bowl. Mavis looked around for the soft pink doll she knew she had been holding just before she fell asleep. She could not see it anywhere. As she looked for the pink doll, she realized none of the other dolls she saw when she entered the tiny cabin were in their same spots. Brianna came back into the cozy living room quickly and handed a wooden bowl and spoon to Mavis. Mavis filled her bowl with the vegetable stew and slowly started to eat, blowing on each bite to help cool it. After a few bites, she felt her belly warming up and her hunger subsiding. She asked, Where is the pink doll I had before? Oh, Brianna said with a raised, curious brow. She too, blowing on her food and taking a bite. Where did it go? It was just here, she said, looking around. It was really cute and soft. What is it? I've never seen anything like it before, Mavis asked before taking another bite. It is a Kirby. It is a creature from another dimension, Brianna explained matter-of-factly, like this was common knowledge. Mavis' face scrunched up in confusion. Another dimension? She paused. What is that? Brianna sat for a moment, thinking of a way to explain it to Mavis in a way she would understand. We live in our reality, and there are countless realities out there, but we cannot see them or interact with them. Like, there's Warlock Village and Hagtown. Those are like two separate realities, and the people from the two towns can interact with each other if they wish. However, there are countless towns, villages, and cities all over our world. But we don't see them, and they don't interact with us. Brianna paused to let Mavis process the information and then continued. Dimensions are like that. There are some dimensions which are close together and can interact, and others where they will never have interaction. Does that make sense? Mavis nodded. I think so. She sat in silence for a few moments thinking. That creature is from a different reality or dimension, and it somehow made it to our world and we can interact with it? She asked. Brianna smiled broadly. You are very clever, aren't you? I do spend a lot of time in my own head thinking a lot, Mavis sighed heavily. I'm afraid my family does not appreciate that about me. They're always telling me how I cause them trouble. I can't be normal like everyone else. I really do try my best to do what they expect of me. It seems like I always get into trouble. Maybe I'm from a different dimension and don't know it. She stopped talking and looked sad. Unexpectedly, the Kirby rolled off the shelf and landed on Mavis' lap, surprising her. Oh, where did you come from? Mavis asked the creature and began to pet it again. She smiled at the doll in her hand. Mavis, with a full belly and feeling the warmth of the fire, she gave a large yawn, attempting to keep it contained or at least controlled, but she failed, sleep threatening to take her. Oh my, looks like someone could use some sleep, Brianna said, setting her crocheting down and standing. Come with me. Mavis followed behind, still holding on to the Kirby. Brianna led Mavis upstairs and into the simple bedroom with a bed, a table, and a chair. The bed had a warm-looking quilted blanket with no two colors repeating. "You can sleep in my room tonight." "I can't take your bed. I can sleep on the floor or something," Mavis said quickly. "Nonsense. I rarely sleep in here anyways." Lighting a candle, casting the darkened room in shadows, she patted the bed. "You sleep well. I will see you in the morning." Brianna closed the bedroom door and left Mavis in the room with the Kirby and candlelight. Mavis looked around the room and saw more crocheted dolls on shelves. Most people would find it creepy, but Mavis liked the dolls. She also knew she was not like most people. She liked to look at all the cute dolls. Some looked like things she was familiar with, like bees, turtles, and various animals. There were also strange ones which looked like nothing Mavis had ever seen before. Even though they were strange looking, Mavis thought they were cute. Mavis yawned again and stood up from the bed and pulled the covers back and slid into bed. She placed the Kirby next to her pillow, blew out the candle, and snuggled down into the bed. Within a few moments, the heavy breathing of sleep filled the room. Mavis experienced troubled dreams throughout the night. Dreams of her mother being angry when she arrived home the next morning and the tongue lashing and punishment Mavis would receive. The horrible teasing and bullying she would get from her brothers. At one point, Mavis thought she woke up, and as she lay there looking up at the ceiling unmoving, she became aware of the crocheted dolls surrounding her on the bed. The Kirby she knew she had left by her head was sitting on her chest. Mavis tried to scream, but she felt paralyzed and no sound came out. "I want her to stay," the Kirby told the other dolls. "She is my friend." "You know it's not up to us," the bee doll replied. "Mistress Brianna is the one who must decide if she can stay," the turtle doll said. Mavis saw the other dolls circled around her, nodding in agreement. The Kirby's expression changed, and the creature's cheeks puffed out in defiance. "I will talk with the mistress." Mavis drifted back to sleep. The next morning, Mavis woke with a startle. She sat up quickly and looked around. The crocheted dolls were back in their places on the shelves. She looked at her pillow, and the Kirby still rested where she had left it the night before. Mavis shoved her fists into her eye sockets and rubbed her eyes. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She picked up the Kirby and held it out in front of her. "It must have all been a dream," she told the Kirby. She gave it a hug and got out of bed. Still carrying the Kirby, she padded down the stairs into the living room and was met with the delicious smell of food cooking. "Good morning, dear. How did you sleep?" Brianna greeted her from the fireplace. She was bent over making breakfast. Mavis set the Kirby down in the rocking chair. "I slept all right, except—" Mavis paused, unsure if she should tell Brianna about her weird dream. Whenever Mavis told her family about her crazy dreams, they mocked and made fun of her. "Except?" Brianna repeated, patiently waiting. Mavis looked down at her feet, feeling her embarrassment flush her face. "I had some weird and crazy dreams. I thought the crochet dolls you made came alive and were all around me on the bed. They were talking that they wanted to ask you to let me stay." Mavis then quickly added, "I know it was just a dream, and I think it's because I feel so comfortable being here. You haven't judged me once since I came here, and you've been so kind. In fact, you're more kind to me than my own family." Mavis looked at Brianna and smiled. Brianna's smile widened. She dropped her voice like she was telling Mavis a secret and winked. "Us weirdos need to stick together." Her tone returned to normal. "Here, breakfast is ready, and you must be starved. You certainly slept in this morning. It's nearly lunchtime." Mavis gasped. "Oh my gosh, really?" Mavis looked panicked, looking around her for her clothes to get dressed. "I need to get going then. I'm already in loads of trouble." Anxiety filling her up. Brianna puffed out her cheeks and pursed her lips together. "Well, since you are already in trouble, you should at least eat before you start on the long walk home. You don't want to be doing that on an empty stomach." Brianna handed Mavis a plate full of food. "Eat," she commanded. Mavis took the offered plate at the same time her stomach growled. She knew Brianna was right. Mavis was already in trouble for staying out all night. What were a few more hours? Mavis nodded. You're right, she said, and sat down and devoured her food. She felt herself warming from the inside as the food filled her belly. They both sat in silence while they ate, the fire slowly dying. Finally, Brianna was the one to break the quiet when the fire only had glowing embers. You could stay here, she said bluntly. It has been nice having the company. It sounds like you don't have a very good life with where you're at. I'm getting older now and could use help around here and to have company. Mavis paused with the fork halfway to her mouth. She looked into Brianna's hazel green eyes, expecting them to be joking, but her eyes looked serious. You are serious? Mavis asked. Brianna chuckled. Of course I am. She waved Mavis off like she was being silly for asking. You can stay here. I like you, and you are weird like me. We can be weird together. Mavis set her fork down and looked at the remaining eggs and potatoes she had left on her plate. She felt tempted to say yes right away. Mavis looked around the room at the various crocheted animals, creatures, and dolls. For a moment, Mavis could have sworn they were all leaning in closer, waiting for her reply. Can I think about it? Mavis asked. Brianna's face softened, and she gave Mavis a somber smile. Of course you can, Mavis. It is your life, and you are the one who is in charge of it. I will say this. Do not let anyone, your family, or even me, tell you what you can or cannot do with your life. It is your life to live, and no one else's. Mavis, for the first time in a very long time, felt herself smiling a genuine smile. She laughed softly to herself. She sighed heavily. She thought of her family and felt her stomach drop. She did not feel like her life was with them or even with her own town. Her thoughts drifted to her friend Sam, her first real friend she truly felt she had. She did want to see him, but at the same time, Mistress Brianna's words ringing in her ear. It is your life. Surprisingly, Mavis came to the decision a lot quicker than she thought. She found it incredibly easy to let go of her horrid and vile family. She would never have to see them again. She would never have to be punished or scolded by her mother or father. She'd not have to endure the brutal bullies in town, her brothers included. Mavis cleared her throat, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I have felt free being here and more welcome than I have ever have. I am a klutz, and I screw up a lot. I daydream a lot, and my mind wanders. If you can handle that about me, I really want to stay here. Yay! Mavis heard a crowd cheer around her. To Mavis' shock and amazement, all the crocheted animals, creatures, and dolls began to jump down off the shelves and move towards her. Mavis stared wide-eyed, her voice not being found. She felt a soft, small tap on her ankle and looked down to see the Kirby, alive, looking up at her. Mavis, I'm so glad you want to stay. The small voice sounded familiar. Sam? Mavis' eyes went even wider when she recognized the voice. She bent down and picked up the Kirby and looked at it more closely. The Kirby smiled at her, nodding. What? How? I don't understand. Mavis struggled for words. We made the choice to be turned into these dolls, Sam explained. I'd rather live here where I can be myself and happy. He crossed his short, stubby pink arms. Here, I am accepted. I know you feel the same way, Mavis. You do not want the life your parents or society is going to force on you. Mavis' mind trying its best to keep up with the sudden turn of events. The shock finally starting to wear off, but now a twinge of fear taking its place. She looked at Brianna, and she calmly sat there working on her crocheting, like nothing happened, or acknowledging the talking creatures. What are you making? Mavis asked, her voice full of suspicion. Brianna smiled and held up a large crocheted flower. Mavis gasped. Well, daisies are your favorite, right? I thought you would like to be a daisy. Brianna smiled. But I can make whatever you like. It will be your new body. Mavis had not returned home for 2 days. When she did not return home from the night of the terrible storm, her brother John, at the request of their parents, hurried to Warlock Village to see if his dumb sister stayed over there because of the storm. He did not care what happened to his sister because she was a nuisance anyways. He could not tell his parents his true feelings about his sister. Even though he grumbled on the inside, he complied and went to Warlock Village. He came home a few hours later with news for his parents that Mavis had left from work to head home that night. Despite the flower store owner advising Mavis to stay because of the impending storm, Mavis had refused and decided to go home for the night. At the news, Mavis' mother grumbled under her breath something that sounded like, "Stupid girl." After John's news, the family went to the town square to inform the town Mavis was missing. Mavis' mother let out a sob, not out of feeling worried or concerned for her missing daughter, but to put on a show for the townspeople surrounding the family. Mavis' father patted his wife on the shoulder, he too putting on an act of concern. Both parents inside, the beginnings of relief filling them up. They may not have a useless daughter anymore. On the outside, they put on the show of being concerned for their missing child, for the sake of their friends and other town folk. They, of course, needed to keep up appearances. After the second day of Mavis not returning home, the town organized a search party. They searched all along the trail between Hagtown and Warlock Village, looking for any signs of where Mavis went. When the search party reached where the path split, one path leading to Warlock Village and the other leading deep into the forest, they decided to take a rest break. Mavis' two brothers, John and Keith, had joined in the search party at the request of their parents. Both brothers would have rather not wasted time looking for their dim-wit sister, but their parents said that they had to make it look like the family cared for Mavis. John took a swig of water from his canteen and handed it to Keith. They had moved away from the main group so they could talk in peace. The townspeople avoided the path leading into the forest because of the rumors of children and young adults who go missing when they go down the path into those woods. The townspeople, being superstitious, would not even get close to where the path forked. This is why John, the oldest brother, led Keith to this spot and sat down. John, taking an uneasy look down the forest path, he was the first who spotted the crumpled daisy half buried in the dirt. Since no one would dare travel down the forest path, the ground had not been disturbed since the rainstorm. He got up and walked to the crumpled and wilted flower. He squatted down for a closer look and barely could make out small footsteps leading deeper along the path into the forest. A slow smile spread across his face. He got Keith's attention and motioned for him over. Keith unhurriedly got up and walked over to his older brother. John pointed to the daisy and the footprints. The two brothers exchanged a knowing look. They knew Mavis always brought home the unsold daisies from work. John called over the mayor's son and showed him the daisy and footprints. The rest of the search party began to gather, and they each decided in their own mind to stop looking for Mavis. They all knew she would not return home. With Mavis's disappearance and the phenomenal performance from Mavis' parents, the mayor of Hagtown had warning signs placed at the fork in the road. No one had dared to ever go down the path, but every once in a while, a person or child would go missing. At the request of Mavis' parents and urging from the town, the mayor thought it was about time to have signs placed warning anyone who thought of going down the path. Everyone knew of the witch who lived down the path in the forest, who kidnapped children.